Well, good morning. I'm back 2 weeks in a row. I promise you won't have to endure any longer. I'm going back to Effingham next week, so, things will get back to normal. So we're talking about Thyatira today. So if you have your Bibles, open up Revelation chapter 2. But there's some things that I just want to go over before we get started in Thyatira. All right? We're looking at the 7 churches of Revelation. I should also preference this with, today I was told that I got a little wound up in first service. So, disclaimer, I love you all and I love the church, but Jesus is going to have some warnings for us at the end here. So just, know that I love you today whenever I speak today. So, there's some things that John relates to us from Jesus in all 7 of the books, or all 7 of the letters that we see in Revelation. So the first one that we always see, it's addressed to the angel of the church of, and then the location. So it's the idea that he knows the church he's talking to. It's not just a blanket statement to the church, the big global church. It's to these places. He knows their situation. He knows the cities and the context in which he's speaking to them. He knows what's going on in these cities and in the churches. And so every church is addressed to the angel of the church of. The other thing we see is Jesus identifies who he is in every one of these letters. In fact, most of the time, he opens it up with a declaration of authority and he closes the letter with a declaration of authority using the cultural context of the specific location. So he plays in on, and we're going to see this today, the emperor or the ones that are in charge. And he plays into that going, listen, I know who you are, I know your situation, and I am the one who's in control. And he does that for each one of the cities. He identifies who he is. In fact, those can actually all be found back in Revelation 1. If you read this, we'll read this, 12 through 18. John says, I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me. And when I turned, I saw the 7 golden lampstands, which that's going to represent the churches, right? And amongst the lampstands was someone like the Son of Man. Okay, that's an identification piece, Son of Man. And he's among the churches. He's with the churches. So you have the 7 lampstands, and he's with the churches. The Son of Man is an identification piece that we're going to see later on of who that is. Dressed in a robe, reaching down to his feet, with a golden sash around his chest. Authority, royalty. The hair on his head was white like wool and white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held the 7 stars, and coming out of his mouth was a sharp double-edged sword. We talked about Euskalate last week, right? Everyone knows about Euskalate now? His face was like the sun shining in all of its brilliance. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. Then he placed his right hand on me and said, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and now look, I am alive forever and ever. And I hold the keys of death and Hades. Listen, Revelation, the book of Revelation is oftentimes, we run away from it because we don't understand it. It's scary to us. Jesus wants us to know with confidence who he is and what he has done. And the book of Revelation is this letter to the churches saying, I'm in control, guys. I know what's going on. I know where you're at. And I hold the keys of death and Hades. I am the ultimate authority. I am the author of life over all things. I am in control. And he has this intimate knowledge of their situation, and he has an intimate knowledge of who they are. He sees them. I want us to hear this today, that God sees your situation. He sees you. He knows all your past, he knows your present, and he knows your future. He knows you, whether you know him or not. And all of these letters have a promise to those who overcome. If you go read Revelation chapter 21 and 22, it's the promises. It's a new heaven, a new earth. It's where all things will be made right once and for all. There will be no more sorrow, no more death, no more guilt, no more shame. Relationships will be restored in perfect harmony because our ultimate relationship is with Jesus. All things will be made right once and for all for those who overcome and those who persevere. And then each one of these letters has a call to hear what the Spirit says. Because the reality is, all 7 of these churches, they have good things, they have bad things, and the reality is we're a mixture of all of them. And so when we're going through each one of these letters, our prayer ought to be, God, let us have ears to hear what you are speaking to us. Examine us, right? Show us where we need you more, where you need to come in and fix what's broken inside of us, where we need redeemed because we have compromised to the culture. Listen, the book of Revelation, the 7 churches, compromise is all over it because they're dealing with a culture that's saying indulge. They're saying participate. And listen, we live in a culture that says just give in, just indulge, do your thing, do you, because that's right. And Jesus says no, it's not. Listen, we are at war. Like we are at war for eternity. Your soul right now, there is a battle being waged for your soul, for your marriage, for your relationship, for your integrity. There is a war being waged. And Satan wants nothing more than to come in and steal it. And God, He loves us. This is the message of Revelation. He loves His church, He loves His people, and He's warning them. Don't compromise to what is around you. I think as we look at Thyatira, we're gonna see some things that highlight this, that push us forward, and ought to cause us to really think. Matt recorded this video on location in Thyatira, so listen to the words as he reads Revelation 2:18 and following.
The church in Thyatira is mentioned in Acts 16 as being the hometown of Lydia. But not only is it the hometown of Lydia, it's also one of the major churches in Asia Providence. To the angel of the church in Thyatira write, "These are the words of the Son of God, whose eyes are like blazing fire and whose feet are like burnished bronze. I know your deeds, your love and your faith, your service and perseverance, and that you are now doing more than you did at first. Nevertheless, I have this against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet. By her teaching, she misleads my servants into a sexual immorality and the eating of food sacrificed to idols. I have given her time to repent of her immorality, but she is unwilling. So I will cast her on a bed of suffering, and I will make those who commit adultery with her suffer intensely, unless they repent of her ways. I will strike her children dead. Then all of the churches will know that I am He who searches hearts and minds, and I will repay each of you according to your deeds. Now I say to the rest of you in Thyatira, to you who do not hold to her teaching and have not learned Satan's so-called deep secrets, I will not impose any other burdens on you, except to hold to what you have until I come." Archaeologists haven't revealed much in Thyatira from New Testament times. However, they have uncovered a Roman road and part of a public building. They've also found coins and inscriptions indicating that these people here worship the Greek gods of Apollo, Zeus, and Artemis. Inscriptions also tell us that this place was known for its leather, bronze, pottery, wool, and fabrics.
So let's look at Thyatira real quick. Just some things that you need to know about this place. It was not a large city, wasn't a big church, wasn't really that important of a church. But here's what it was. It was a strategic military outpost. This is where we're talking about like tanks are parked, troops are training for battle. This is the place like you're getting ready to go out and do some damage, right? And so the Romans kept all their like best soldiers here, all their armor, like this is the place to be, right? It's a strategic place too because of how they could deploy quickly to different areas in the Roman Empire. And so Thyatira, the place, the church, not that important of a place as far as like prominence in Christianity, but strategic in placement. Listen, the gospel is very strategic in this place too because it had the ability, we talked about last week with Pergamum being able to be spread quickly. Thyatira is the point in which it can go out in all directions quickly as well. And we see that Lydia is the one, most likely, who brought the gospel back to this area. In Acts 16, it talks about how she accepted Paul's message. She's baptized into Christ. She accepts this. And then she invites Paul and his traveling companions to go share a meal with one another at her house. And then they go on celebrating. And the next thing we know, John is writing to the church in Thyatira in the book of Revelation. Listen, the gospel, this is so cool because Paul didn't go start the church in Thyatira. The gospel is what started the church in Thyatira. Lives that are transformed, the truth that is embraced of Jesus is what moves us forward and what transforms people's hearts, and then people gather to that. And they say, yes, we want to follow that. And so the gospel goes out from this place. It comes in through Lydia and goes out. The other thing as you saw about Thyatira today, it's like this little tiny city park. It's not even that great of a place. This was our first stop in Turkey, and it was very disappointing. I was like, where's like all the cool stuff that like you see in all the videos that we've been seeing, right? We show up at Thyatira, it's like 7 a.m., nobody's there. We have to go wake up the little guard to let us into the little park, and he charges like $15 to get in. I'm like, really? Like for this? Anyway, and we were the only like white people in this place. We were getting some serious looks at 7 a.m. in Thyatira because no one goes there. All right? But we did. We go there. We shoot you can see our podcast that we shot there. It was really awkward. This is probably the most awkward podcast we do because we're all nervous. We're like, are we going to get shot? Are we going to get captured? What's going on? You know? And so anyway, you can go check that out. So Thyatira is a place where things are going on, strategic place, all these different things, right? So let's look at the letter that John writes to the church here and how Jesus addresses them. So remember, I said that Jesus establishes his authority. So these are the words of the Son of God. It's a very specific address that Jesus lays out to the church in Thyatira. As we've been looking at all these books, we know that Jesus is making a claim of his authority, of his power, and this is no different. So the Emperor Domitian had the claim, he referred to himself as the Son of God. And so when Jesus says this, he's once again establishing that. Whose eyes are like blazing fire and whose feet are like burnished bronze. So when we look at this, we're like, okay, that's like purity and all this stuff. Yes. But there's another thing going on in Thyatira that we just need to know about. As Matt mentioned in the video, there's all these different works, like leatherwork, silversmith, all these different things. And what they were is basically trade unions, is what they were. And if you were a part of the union in these places, you got to buy and sell in the marketplace. Well, one of the most important unions, one of the most important guilds that was in Thyatira was the Bronze Guild. They were actually the most powerful one. They controlled the city. Just like anything else in our day, politics were played into this. Your status was played into this. And so what would happen is, as Christians, there was a problem. Last week we talked about all the different idols that you'd go and worship. Well, this is you had to pledge your allegiance to the guild. And by doing this, you had to worship these false gods. So Domitian, emperor worship is number one, Son of God. That's how he referred to himself. So you had to worship the emperor, but then you also had to worship a patron god of your guild to be able to be accepted in, to be able to buy and sell. And so what would happen is, as believers, this was a problem for them. And they would pledge their allegiance to Jesus, not the guild or these patron gods. Revelation 13, John talks about how this played out in Thyatira. It's verse 16 and 17. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. So this was a common practice to be marked by the Emperor Domitian, to be able to go in and buy and sell. As believers, if you did that, you were compromising. Do you see the problem that the people in Thyatira have? This is their livelihood. This is how they make money. This is how they feed their families. And your decision to follow Jesus is going to mean that your kids go hungry. It means that you're not going to have a house because you're not going to be able to pay for it. You see the ramifications of following Jesus? Last week we talked about it may cost you your life, but here it's going to cost you your wallet. It's going to cost you where a lot of times it may hurt the most. And Jesus gives them the commendation of, hey, I know your deeds. I know what you're doing. So keep doing that. You're doing more than what you were. Keep going. And he gives them some hope. But then he goes into a rebuke. He says, but I have this against you. You tolerate the teaching of that woman Jezebel. If you go into the Old Testament, you'll see that story of King Ahab. He's a king of Israel. He's told not to marry a foreign wife. So what does he do? He marries a foreign wife. That seems like a great idea, right? God tells you specifically, don't do something, and then you go do that. That's a bad plan, by the way. 1 Kings 16, we're not going to read it today, but basically what happens is King Ahab, he goes and marries this foreign woman Jezebel, and she brings with her all her foreign gods, Baals. And these involved sexual immorality, the way you'd worship. You'd worship with prostitutes in these temples. You'd sacrifice meat to these idols. And through Jezebel, Ahab leads the people of Israel astray. And it sends them into a time of idol worship. And it's not a good time in Israel's history if you go read 1 Kings. And so compromise leads to their destruction, just as compromise leads to our destruction today. I think it's interesting as we look at these cities, all these churches that we went to, what remains are stones and rocks of these places. Compromise leads to destruction, not just physically, but spiritually as well. So then we go on, and the end of this section, it says, to the one who is victorious. Remember the promises. The promises are in each one of these churches. The one who is victorious and does my will to the end, I will give authority over the nations. That one will rule with the iron scepter and will dash them to pieces like pottery, just as I have received authority from my Father. I will also give that one the morning star. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So when we look at this morning star, whenever you're studying this, I'm still gleaning all kinds of awesome things from this myself. But that morning star, so Domitian was the emperor, right? The Son of God, that's how he referred to himself. But his campaign, all right, his campaign slogan that he would put on his banners stretched across the empire would read this about himself: the morning star who will take us to a new day in Rome. And so Jesus is saying, I am the morning star who will lead us to a new kingdom, right? Just think about the people in Thyatira. When they have seen this campaign banner hung up in their city about Domitian, the bright morning star who will lead us to a new day in Rome, and then you get word from John, the apostle, who hung out with Jesus, and they're like, hey, John's got a message for us because while he was out on Patmos, Jesus came and gave him some info, and then they read this, and could you just imagine hearing this, that they're going to be given the bright morning star who's going to lead them to a new day, and you just look up and you see the campaign banner, of Domitian, and you're like, oh, Domitian thinks he's the one leading us, but really my allegiance is to Jesus. And so Jesus is urging these believers to hang on to what is true. Don't compromise to the culture around them. And so we see these letters, all of these letters, pointing us towards the hope that is in Jesus. There's actually a cool picture that the Jewish writer John uses to communicate this picture. So it's kind of like this arrowhead, right? And it's called a chiastic structure. You guys are going to learn some big words, right? So ready? Here we go. Let's say it together. Chiastic structure. Okay, and so what this means is it's pointing us, all the churches are pointing us to a point, And check out this picture here, okay? So what it is the first one and the last one, so first church, seventh church of Revelation, which is Ephesus and Laodicea, they're about to lose their position as a church because of their depravity. They're dead on the inside, right? Then you have the second and the sixth church. They're not rebuked. Promised persecution, but a crown to those who overcome. So there's this victory type thing, but hey, persecution's coming. Then you have the third and the fifth. Pergamum. They've fallen prey to compromise to culture. We talked about that last week. And so then you have Thyatira, which is the fourth church, and it's pointless. They're struggling, but they're moving forward. They don't have it together, but they're moving forward because they're keeping their eyes at least on Jesus. All right? So check this quote out. Martin Luther King, he had this quote, and I loved it, so I'm using it. It says, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. This is the picture of the gospel. We're going to fall down. We're going to stumble and fall. Because guess what? We all have stuff in our lives that is sin, right? It's sin. And we're all jacked up to some degree. Whether you're like all jacked up or a little bit jacked up, you're all jacked up, all right? And we need Jesus. We're going to fall, we're going to stumble, but we have to keep moving forward. We have to continue in what has been given to us. Because listen, Jesus says, come as you are. If you're here today and you're not a believer, come as you are. But I'm going to tell you this, Jesus is not going to leave you there, nor is that the plan for him. You may come as you are, but he's not going to leave you where he found you. And Christian, here today, he doesn't want to leave you where he found you. He paid the price for our sins on the cross with his life, not to leave us where he found us, but to take us to where he wants us. And so we are not going to, as believers, we are not called to cheapen the gospel. We are not to cheapen what has been done on our behalf. But we are called to follow him with everything we got. Listen, I like working out, but you know those mornings where it's like, especially in January, February, it's cold outside. I work out in my garage, so it's like cold out there. You're like, I don't want to get up early. So you're doing the stretch, like I'm warming up. Then you do a little more stretching. But squats are ahead of you that day. Your knees are a little creaky, shoulders a little achy, but you're like, I'm going to just stretch some more, warm up. Listen, you got to get beyond the warm up and stretch. Some days you just got to get in there, put the squat bar on your back, get down and get back up and keep doing it. Listen, with our relationship with Jesus, far too often we go, yeah, Jesus is like, yeah, I'm about to do that. I'm about to get after that. I'm right there with you, Jesus. I'm about to. We got to get off the warm up. We got to get off the warm up and the stretch and get in and get after it. Because that's what Jesus is calling us to do. There's a war, remember? There's a war being waged for our eternity. And we're going to do warm-up sets? No. We're going to get in and get after it. That's what Jesus has called us to. Some of you guys are like, wow, that's pretty harsh. You're like, he doesn't know my situation. He doesn't know where I'm at. He doesn't know what's going on. You're right, I don't. Jesus does. He knows your past, he knows your present, and he knows your future. And you know what he's waiting on? He's waiting for us to lay it at his feet. He says, because I've already paid for it. Yeah, you got stuff in your past. Paid for it. Let's move on. I've given you a new identity. You got stuff right now that you're going through? I know. I'm going through it with you. I want to go through it with you. I want to give you the comfort. I want to give you the peace. I want to give you a new identity that you're not defined by your situation, but you're defined by the gospel. Because we're at war. We don't have time. There's people dying without knowing Jesus. He says, let's go. So it's time for us as believers. We start owning our mistakes. We start owning our sin, our shortcomings, and we lay them at the feet of Jesus, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He's taking care of it. So let's not keep bringing them back up. Let's not lessen what Jesus has done for us. But we walk in the promises and we walk in the truth that He has declared on our behalf. Not because of my righteousness, not because of how good I am. No, it's in fact how bad I am. Because here's the deal. When we recognize how bad sin really is, we understand how glorious our King really is. So we don't walk in our power, we walk in His. Listen, He's ready and willing, but He's waiting on you. And He's a patient God. To the people in Thyatira, He says, I don't tolerate the sin that Jezebel, this prophet who's saying you can compromise with culture. It's the same thing. You can have Jesus and you can compromise. That's what she's saying. And He's saying, I'm not going to tolerate that. But I'm calling you to repent from it. Turn away from it and follow me. Hold to what you know is true. The world will constantly tell us to compromise. Just a little bit, it won't hurt. I've heard the illustration, I don't even know, I may have used it here, but it's like, how much dog poop do you want in your brownie? None. You don't want any, do you? That's kind of what we do with our Christianity, though, right? It's like, well, if we have a little bit of poop in our life, it's all right, and it'll be all right. No. Jesus wants all of us. And when we fall short, and we will, by the way, we will fall short. We lay it at the feet of Jesus and we move on. But here's the deal. You don't do that by yourself. We've talked about this too. Your relationship with Jesus is very personal, but it was never meant to be private. You need other people in your lives because the best way to make sure you get a squat done on a cold Monday morning is you have someone else showing up with you to do it. Someone's in the fight with you, that you're not doing it alone. Why would we think that we could walk a life of faith by ourselves? We can't. You're going to fall, and there's not going to be anyone to pick you up. So get with other people that love Jesus. Get in a group. Get with somebody listen, and they ain't going to be perfect either, and they're going to bring some junk into your life as well. That's okay, because it's not about us, it's about Jesus. And so we put our hearts and we put our minds on Jesus, and we go after Him. He's saying, listen, Thyatira, I know what you've done. You're doing more than what you were. Keep going. Keep pushing on. Keep going forward. It's worth it. I promise you. Jesus wants the same for you. He wants the same for me. That when we fall down, we get up and we go after Him with everything we have because we are in the most important battle of the world. And we have a King who's conquered the war. So we walk humbly in ourselves and we walk boldly in His truth.